Okay, so this is a short slash midterm review for the Kyosho RT6 stadium truck. I've been running this for the outdoor season for about a month or so, and it's great. I mean, that's the very short summary there. I've really enjoyed driving this truck. Surprisingly, I haven't had to do quite a lot with setup. It's been pretty good out of the box. I've only changed, I think, one or two things. For the rear shocks, I'm running the shocks on the innermost hole on the tower. And I think, if I remember correctly, I may have changed the rear roll center a little bit. So, no, actually, that's not true. I'm still running, I think that's a 2mm spacer there under the rear ball stud, which is on the inside hole. I believe that's the stock setup. Hub carriers are stock setup with the location and everything. I haven't moved them forward or backward. The front's all stock. So really, yeah, it was just the rear shock angle that I changed. I thought about running a stiffer rear spring because I'm running a rear motor chassis, but I haven't really had to do that. It handles pretty good so far. In terms of shock oil, I believe I'm running 30 weight front oil and 25 weight rear oil. Let's see, as far as the wear on the bottom of the chassis goes, I mean, I do run a chassis protector here, and so this, how this protector wears should give you an indication of, whether the car's bottoming out or anything like that. And I haven't really had any issues, even at the rear, right, where the rear of the chassis I would expect to bottom out because I set this up with the rear motor configuration, and the chassis protector is wearing just fine. There's actually very little wear back there, so they could just be the ride height that I'm running and everything else, but it's quite good. I mean, especially compared to the initial review that I did for my Laser ZX6, there was quite a lot of wear, up front with the nose bottoming out a lot. Here I'm not having that problem. Things to watch out for, I can think of one or two things. For the servo, I have stripped one or two servo horns. Now, granted, I'm actually not using the Kyosho servo horns that come with the kit. I'm working through all of my spare team-associated servo horns because they're almost the exact same size. So I'm just using those because I happen to have quite a few of them. So if you happen to strip the servo horn and then you have to take the servo out to replace it, it's a little bit of dexterity kind of gymnastics there, because between the servo and the chassis, there are these two little washers that you use, one on either side under the servo mount piece. And so when you mount the servo back in there, you have to make sure those washers are aligned to the screw holes that come in, from under the chassis. So making sure those washers don't move around while you mount the servo back, you got to be, a little careful there. You could, use some CA or maybe some shoe goo or something just to kind of tack those washers in place just to hold them down and keep them there. That would be a smart thing to do. I haven't done it, but that's one thing to watch out for. The other thing is the battery mount. The battery mount is actually a little cumbersome. I mean, the way that they designed this little plate here that covers the rear portion of the battery, they actually made the plastic a bit longer, and I had to cut it down just so I could fit the battery in there without over flexing this and risk, coming into any risk of snapping this. But even with this cut down, it's still a fair amount of flex that I need to induce in this top plate here just to slide the battery in. So it would have been nice if they designed this a little differently so that it doesn't extend quite as far out in this direction, but maybe extends a bit more, towards the rear, so you get some coverage of this end of the chassis, of the battery. And likewise for this brace or cover here, for the front end of the battery, they do make it longer, and you have to kind of cut it down to make it all fit. So, this does require a little bit of custom work. And even still, what I find myself having to do, because the receiver mounts up here for my setup, So I have to kind of push the receiver out of the way, so I have this mounted on Velcro, which I always do anyway. And that gives me just a little bit of space here to mount the battery in without rubbing up against, you know, all of these connectors here. So, you know, that's a bit weird, if you will. But it's not, you know, a killer for me. I do find it peculiar how in the instruction manual they want you to mount the receiver here in this teeny tiny little compartment here, and you can see where the plastic is kind of a different shade here. So in the instruction manual, that's supposedly where you mount the receiver. I don't know if anyone makes a receiver that's small enough to fit in there. I suppose they exist, but since I run these, you know, clunky Spectrum receivers, that's just not an option for me. So if you have larger electronics, you may run into a few issues here with fitting everything. I'm running Novak GTB3 speed control, and that mounts on a little plate here on the rear, so, you know, that seems to work okay. One thing you could do, I suppose, is to try to mount the receiver under this mounting plate for the speed control, but there's not a whole lot of room along the z-axis in the vertical direction to kind of fit everything in there. So that's why I moved the receiver up here. But everything, you know, fits eventually, and it does work. So it's not, you know, it's okay. I did manage to actually break the this rear suspension arm hinge pin mount. I just, you know, had a bad landing. I think I hit a pipe or something with, you know, a rear tire, and it actually snapped this rear mount piece here. So thankfully, on the parts tree that you get for that, which also includes the gearbox, and I think it includes the gearbox and like 4 versions of this hinge pin mount, and I think 2 of them are for the front rear hinge pin mount, and then the other 2 are for the rear. But only 2 of those are what you use for this kit, and then there's another set of 2 that I guess you're not supposed to use, or they have a slightly different geometry or whatever. But it's all I had at the time when I broke that part, so I just used that other mount on here, which I'm running right now, and I didn't notice any difference in how the car behaves. So, you know, it works fine. But that's the only thing I've really broken so far. The rest of it's been perfectly fine. As far as drivability goes, you know, again, the only setup change I've had to make is the rear shock angle. Everything else is completely stock, and it drives great. I mean, it drives a lot like how my T4.1 used to drive a couple of years ago. I really enjoyed that truck. The only problem with that trunk is that it was a pile of crap. I mean, it would fall apart a lot. The gearbox would just get eaten alive by any mod motor I put in there. You know, the T4 platform was just very poor quality parts. So this is, you know, much like how the Laser ZX6 is what the B44 should have been, this RT6 is what the T4 should have been. It's better parts quality, everything's, you know, more solid. The drivetrain's great. The gearbox is holding up nicely. The diff is still smooth. You know, it's not chunky or anything like that. Everything's wearing very nicely. So I really like this truck, and I do appreciate that you can set it up in both mid-motor and, you know, rear motor configuration, which also the Losi 22T is capable of doing. But this is great. I'm very happy with it. It is a bit more expensive, if I remember correctly, than the other options out there for stadium truck. But you could argue it's worth it, you know, because the bearings are really good, the drivetrain's good. These quick release wheels are pretty good. I wouldn't say that they're the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's a nice little novel feature that you just, you know, pull this little clip out and the wheel comes right off. But these wheels don't quite so easily slide in and out. You actually kind of have to bang them in place and then make sure the clip is fully seated before you go run the truck. Otherwise, the wheel will fall off. So it is a quick release, but you do have to check it once you mount it just to make sure it's actually sitting there in the right place. I think that's it for this. Overall, very happy with it. I think it's a great truck. Definitely recommend buying this if you're in the market for a stadium truck. I have not tried the Losi stadium truck, if I'm perfectly honest. I know a lot of guys with T5Ms, they're quite happy with them. The only problem with the T5M is you can't run it in rear motor if you happen to have a track surface that demands that. But you can make a T5M work on relatively loose dirt, right? Stadium truck tires are big and fat. So, there are guys at my local track that run T5Ms on the outdoor track, and they do just fine. So, but I'm happy with this Kyosho. I really like it. So that's it. Yeah. Thanks for watching.